Today we're going to be looking at Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of the Red Death. So our first question that we have about Prince Prospero, our main character, and his followers is, why are they retreating into his palace? Why are they just going to stay there and never leave? That's the first question that you would wonder as to why all of these people are together. Well, they're supposed to be escaping the Red Death plague. And that's pretty obvious within the first couple of paragraphs when he says he wants to bring everybody in, nobody gets to leave. There is a Red Death plague that is about. So then when we describe in specific detail the series of rooms in which the Masquerade Ball takes place, there's a series of 7 rooms, and they're in a zigzag pattern. One connects to the next, which connects to the next. Now, to serve as lighting, there are large bowls of burning coals between the rooms. And so with these burning coals, they leave this flicker on the walls. They'll leave a sense of different colors. So each of the 7 rooms has a different color, and the large bowls of burning coals make them fairly dark. So when we start taking a look at the different types of decorations in the rooms, we start off with the black room. Now in the black room there stands a huge ebony grandfather clock, and the decorations will match the color of each room. So there's a Gothic window in each room in which the panes match the color of the room. For example, the black room's window panes are the only exception. Its panes are blood red. So now that we're in our first room, the black room, remember there's a grandfather clock. Well, the party is constantly disrupted every time the clock strikes off another hour. The orchestra actually stops playing, and then the people stop dancing. So then let's take a look at what life is outside the palace versus the life inside the palace with the people that Prospero brought inside. Inside the palace, Prospero's brought the wealthiest inside, whereas outside the poverty-stricken are left. Inside, they are having this masquerade ball. Since it is a masquerade, nobody seems to know who anybody else is. There's almost this sense of fantasy world going on. There's this ball that is going on, and they're trying to forget the real life outside. Whereas outside, obviously, there's a sense of reality. There's a sense of impending doom with the Red Plague. Inside, you have life. People are moving on with life. They don't seem to have a care about what's going on out in the real world. Whereas outside, because of the Red Death, there's death and there's destruction going on outside. We have happiness inside. People are partying. People are talking with one another. People are joined together. Whereas outside, where the death is happening, there is a lot of sorrow. Of course, inside, people are trapped away from the Red Death, so there's health there. Whereas outside, that's where we see the disease and sickness, and so therefore inside, we have a sense of hope. Whereas outside, there is despair. Anything outside has a very negative connotation. Anything inside Prospero's walls are positive connotations. So then let's look at the character of Prospero. Why would he have such a desire to keep his palace free of the plague? What do we learn about him? Well, he's afraid to die. He doesn't want to have people around him that might be bringing the Red Death. And so he brings everybody in that he enjoys, that he is close to. And so he is prejudiced against the poor, and he thinks he can cheat death. He thinks he can buy his way out by just saying, my own world is just inside my castle. We're not going to bring anybody or anything else in. So he seems to believe that he can cheat death by creating himself a new world upon itself. What mood or effect is created by the colors and the lighting in each of the rooms of the ball? Remember, there are 7 different rooms, one connected to the next in kind of a zigzag pattern. It almost causes this dreamlike effect. It almost seems like this fantasy going on because there's a masqueraded ball. You don't really know who anybody is. Again, the lights are being sent up by this coal burning kind of bowl, so the lights are flickering. They're not that bright. Every room is a different color. The mood is almost a dreamlike effect. It seems very fantastic. But then why does the clock have such a dramatic effect on the dancers? Remember, the clock is striking every hour on the hour, and every hour it strikes off, the orchestra stops playing and people stop dancing. It does symbolize a sense of reality, that their lives are slowly ticking away. Every hour, they're reminded they're not in fantasy. There is a sense of reality as life goes on. And then we get to the visitor, and the visitor frightens the guests. Well, why? Remember, Prospero had built this little world amongst himself, and he thought he could make his own world, and he's going to keep the Red Death out. Well, because the visitor suddenly and mysteriously appears out of nowhere, Prospero had planned everything. He decided which guests were coming in. He decided how to decorate his rooms. All of a sudden, there's this visitor who just mysteriously appears out of nowhere. It's going to be frightening for everybody. He also looks like someone with the Red Death plague. He happens to wear a mask that makes him look like he has the Red Death. And he's not talking to anybody. Nobody knows who he is. He's just stalking to and fro as he's going from room to room. So now let's take a look at author's purpose. How does Edgar Allan Poe start to build the terror in the story? Well, we start off by explaining the plague symptoms about the Red Death. That way, when we hear about it a bit later, we're going to start recognizing it. The doors are welded shut. Even though we are having a great time, a party on the inside, it still is like a prison. People who are inside can't leave, even if one wanted to. So the mysterious visitor who is dressed like the Red Death shows up, you can't leave. You have to deal with this person. The dim pulsing lights from the burning coals makes everything kind of fantastic. We're not exactly sure who is whom with the masks in the ball. We're not exactly sure who is whom from the dim lights. The black room with the red panes, your very first room with the black room and red panes, everything else seems to match, but having a black room with red panes just gives this sense of horror, this sense of foreboding. The appearance and the behavior of the intruder. The intruder won't speak to us. We can't see their face, but they are dressed like they have the Red Death. They mysteriously have come into a place that is completely welded shut. We don't know who this person is, so there's a kind of mysterious, almost fearful quality towards this person. And of course, that grandfather clock chiming off every hour, when it constantly stops the party. The orchestra always stops when the clock rings. The dancing always stops when the clock rings. And so the clock constantly stopping the party is almost a reminder every hour of life is actually passing on, the sense of time. This story is an allegory. Now, an allegory is a type of story in which the characters, settings, and events are interconnected in symbols. So for allegories, you're trying to find the symbolism that is happening and wondering what it's supposed to mean in the bigger picture. Now, the deeper or symbolic meaning of the story may contain a lesson about life. So we look for symbols, we try and figure out what those symbols mean, and if we can figure out how they interconnect, that will teach us our theme. That'll teach us our lesson about life. So once we start looking at how the allegory is working in our particular story, what we want to look at is the literal elements of the plot. Like, say, for example, going from room to room, checking out the different colors of the room, for example. And their symbolic counterparts, which often involve philosophical concepts, such as the idea of the grandfather clock clicking off every hour on the hour, and how everything stops when the grandfather clock clicks off. That shows life going by hour after hour. The symbol of the man who's dressed like the Red Death and not talking to anybody. That sense of death is walking through from room to room. We're looking at those senses of not only the setting, but maybe perhaps the actual characters and the plot line themselves. So what is the allegorical lesson in the story of the Masque of the Red Death? Well, one cannot escape his or her fate or death. Prospero has got a lot of money. I mean, you can see the word prosper in his name. He figured if he took all of his friends and family members and trapped them away in a castle, we could actually escape the Red Death. And the theme is that somebody still has to be coming in and feeding them food. Somebody's got to find a way to leave because that's the way people are. So you can't trap people in. You cannot escape your fate or your death. These things are still going to happen. So how does then symbol connect to the theme? Now that we know the theme, Well, the author writes about the intent to make things symbolic, but the reader usually can draw certain symbols from the story, and that would be called projected symbolism, something that you see that the author might not have actually put in. Now, intended symbolism, the author specifically puts symbols in the hopes that you will check them out, such as, say, the colors of the room. Edgar Allan Poe specifically picked the colors of the room to show a certain sense of foreboding, a certain sense of malice. But there might be other symbols called projected symbols that the reader has picked up that the author might not have intended. So taking a look at some classic symbols that we have, a lot of times when we see things such as a heart, a cross, a skull, maybe the color red or the color white, usually those are projected symbols because everybody has a sense or a connotation towards a symbol of those. So when we think of the ideas that might be coming across in our theme, such as life, death, the sense of freedom, the sense of imprisonment in the castle, the sense of joy with the ball, maybe perhaps the sense of hate towards the new visitor with the Masque of Red Death. What could possibly symbolize some of these things? Could it be the colors of the room? Could it be the mask that the man who's dressed like the Red Death is wearing? What could symbolize these different things? And then, of course, symbols will help readers understand the meaning of the story by focusing on specific ideas related to the theme. So let's take a look at some of the symbols from the story. Prince Prospero, he represents wealth and prosperity. First of all, just with the name of Prince, we have this tendency to think royals are quite wealthy. And his actual name, Prospero, we can see the word prosper, to have somebody who has a lot and is still gaining more. That's where his name shows a sense of symbolic nature to it. Now, he represents mankind's futile attempt to live forever. There's always going to be somebody who wants to cheat death, somebody who always wants to have immortality. Prince Prospero is the one in this particular story. The Masquerade Ball that is going on, the event, our plot line that is going on, is a sense of fantasy and trying to escape from reality. We have people knowing that the Red Death is outside, and they're trying to pretend that it's not going to touch them, it has nothing to do with them. At a masquerade ball, remember, people are wearing masks. You cannot tell who each other is. So there's this sense of trying to escape from reality, trying to escape from yourself, and going into a made-up world. The masked figure is probably showing death in general, more specifically the Red Death plague. He is dressed like somebody who has the Red Death. He is masked, so we don't know who he is. We can't name him or identify him as somebody else. So the masked figure who doesn't speak, who wanders around towards everyone, because death comes to everyone, is usually considered death in general. The number 7 might end up being such as the 7 deadly sins. After all, the people who have been trapped in because the doors are being welded shut. Prospero was hoping he would save them. The fact is, though, that they have actually succumbed to the Red Death themselves. And so the number 7 probably means something negative, and most likely it shows the 7 deadly sins. As you go from room to room, you'll notice that the people who are in the ball in each room are enjoying some of the sins. Some of them are envious, some are showing lust, some are showing pride. So the number 7, the amount of rooms that we have, the number of people that we have, are likely showing off our 7 deadly sins. But the number 7 could also mean a sense from the biblical times of positivity. After all, the world was created in 7 days, and it symbolizes a sense of fullness or completion. So maybe perhaps we are looking at a positive number. So whether this was projected or intended symbolism, it could be a negative symbolism that Poe had. It could be a positive one. Maybe perhaps because we start off with room number 1 being blue, and we start off in the east where the sun usually rises, it could mean water, which life begins in water in the womb. For room number 2 being purple, that would be Prince Prospero. Shows royalty, shows power. Usually it shows a dominance of family life. And so this sense of family, this sense of power usually comes with the color purple. Room number 3 is green. As we go through green, we think of the sense of growth, we think of the sense of spring, we think of the sense of life, and so that might show the sense of youth and maturing into adulthood. Room 4 is an orange room. Room 4 usually shows the sense of fertility, productivity. You do have people who are lusting after one another in that particular room, so we're probably looking at the sense of adulthood. Room number 5 is white, maybe after the sense of all the lust and procreation that was going on in room number 4. Perhaps this is the sense of purification, looking for meaning in life, because part of aging is trying to find out what life means and becoming more spiritual. People have a tendency to put the color white towards spiritualism. Room number 6 is violet, that is light purple. Usually that might show a sense of weakening power, because remember, purple is royalty, it's power, it's dominating, but now we have a very light purple, which means your power is starting to weaken, maybe perhaps as a result of an aging body. And then, of course, once we get to room 7, the last room where we've got black with the red window panes, we probably are now looking at the red death, where we've got this sense of sorrow, of loss. A lot of people might even put black and red as to more evil type colors. But of course, we've got a full spectrum of colors here, and it represents the stages of man's life, likely from birth to death. So remember, the rooms are connected together in a zigzag pattern, and they go from east to west. And again, that might be intentional from the author Edgar Allan Poe, where in the east the sun rises and in the west the sun sets. So as maybe you start a new life, you are in the east. As you age and then eventually succumb to death, that would be in the west. So we go from blue to purple, green, orange, white, violet, and then black. So what might they represent? Well, again, we have blue. That might represent a sense of calm or a sense of rebirth, a sense of masculinity, maybe even a sense of sadness. Again, when we take a look at the colors of what they might possibly mean with symbols, it could be intended by the author, or it could just be projected by the reader. Purple likely represents royalty in this story because, again, we've got Prince Prospero, and royalty in purple usually have a sense of power connected to them. Green is usually a sense of growth, a sense of life, a sense of maturity. It could also represent a sense of envy. Orange usually is used as a cautionary color when it comes to, say, signs, but it could also show a sense of fertility, a sense of growth. A lot of different fruits, vegetables, a lot of different foods, they blossom into a sense of an orange color, so it could show a sense of fullness. White usually does have a positive connotation in both ways. So there could be a sense of purity here, maybe a sense of biblical times, or it could just simply mean a time of peace as you're looking for a sense of spiritualism or as you're looking for the meaning of life. Violet shows usually a sense of mystery, a sense of weakening. This, again, could show that you're losing some sense of power. It could also be a continuation of that sense of spirituality. And then finally, black is almost always a negative color when it comes to symbolism. Obviously, it could mean death with the Masque of the Red Death. It could mean, for the people who are still alive, a sense of mourning. Thanks for stopping by and learning about the symbols and the characters of the Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. If this was a great video, I'd appreciate it if you could like. You can also comment and tell me if you would like to see some other types of videos. If you like the channel, please subscribe. Otherwise, go out and check my other videos. Thanks for stopping by.